Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and welcome to the Area Scouts ProCast. We do these weekly lives and feature some of our top advisors, directors, and some special guests that we invite on the show every single week. We're live every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock on the Area Scouts official YouTube page, as well as broadcasting on several live feeds in groups as large as 50,000 members per week. And our direct messaging allows for our live feed viewers to be able to ask questions during the show in two different segments. Once after we do our initial interview. And tonight we have a special guest, our director from our softball program is Alyssa Reina. Thank you for joining us tonight, Alyssa.
Of course.
And as always, we have our director of baseball operations, Brian Murray. And Anthony Anzillo will be joining us shortly, our director of sports performance. And myself, CEO of Area Scouts, who lost his voice in the Yankees Red Sox playoff game last night.
As you should.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
If you didn't, I would be disappointed.
I'm going to do my best. You would think I would have aged out of that, but I haven't yet. I'm still waiting.
You can never age out of that, ever.
Yeah, too much trauma in my life with the Yankees Red Sox to age out of that, I think.
Exactly.
So we're going to start off with Brian. Brian and Alyssa are going to do our normal interview that we have, and then we'll allow to open up for Q&A for Alyssa. And so I'm going to give you both the stage, and here it is, Brian and Alyssa Reina.
All right. Thank you, Lance. And welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on and chatting with us for a few minutes here. So I'm going to jump right into some questions, and we may veer off topic a little bit depending on what we talk about. But first, let's start out and tell me about your journey in the world of softball. So, how'd you start out, travel ball, high school, college, and then, what are you doing now post-college?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start from the beginning. I'm from a really small town in California, and I actually started playing because my dad had built a batting cage for my brother who was playing. He's older than me, and he had a baseball cage in the backyard. And naturally, being a younger sister, I wanted to be better than my brother at everything. So I started playing baseball at around 5, just so I could say that I was better than him. And I ended up, picking up softball. My coach was a mom from up the street. She was awesome. And I just kind of fell in love with the game. It was something that brought me and my dad a lot closer into, that I just did with my family in the backyard with, wiffle balls and bucket lids as bases. And it was something that I just did for fun, and then as I got older, I have a really competitive nature, as a lot of people say kindly, even though it's very aggressive. And so just kind of fell in love with everything. And, where I lived, you couldn't really play competitively because it was so far out of anything. And so I had to travel. Bless my parents. I also had 2 siblings who played competitive other sports. And so I was carpooling with families. I played in Southern California, Oklahoma, Florida, Colorado. And a lot of the teams that I played on, my travel ball teams, were completely different than my high school team. So my high school team, although competitively for the small town I lived in, were just my friends. Not that my travel ball team weren't, it was just that those were the people I went to school every day and hung out with. The weekends I didn't have softball. And my travel ball team became, where I got to play elsewhere rather than just my small town. So about my junior year of college, I was at the Sparkler tournament in Colorado, and actually, ironically enough, my teammate and I, my shortstop and I, got recruited to a bunch of different places together. 3 schools actually together recruited both of us, and we ended up going on 2 of those visits together, and one of them was NDSU. And I canceled my other 2 visits that summer because I just fell in love with it so much and fell in love with the people, the place. I knew I wanted to get out of California for college. I just kind of wanted to get out home. I wanted to experience something different. But I fell in love with, I think, most of all the culture, just the athletic culture, the kind of like chip on your shoulder, underdog mentality, kind of like you work for what you get, nothing's going to be handed to you kind of feel. And the fact that I was moving halfway across the United States to go to school, I wanted to find a place where I felt that I could have a family, and that's exactly what I got. So and that goes to college. And then my 5th year, I ended up having surgery my sophomore year on my throwing shoulder, rotator cuff, and labrum. Ended up having another surgery my 5th year on my UCL. It's in my catching thumb. And during that year, I kind of found that I just didn't want to give up the sport anymore. And I didn't know how I wasn't going to give it up. All I knew is that I wanted to stay in softball. And so one of my old head coaches at NDSU, she went to Iowa State my 5th year and then got a job at Minnesota, and called me up and said, "Hey, I want you on my staff. Will you come coach with me?" And now I'm serving as a assistant coach for my 5th year there.
Wow. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Great school too.
Yeah.
You talked about California, you talked about NDSU. So moving to the far Midwest from California, what kind of adjustment did that take for you? Different kind of lifestyle out there, right?
Oh, yes. So a lot of people think it's hilarious that they're like, "Oh gosh, the snow," like that was probably the biggest adjustment for you. But where I live, we get snow. And plus I'm from kind of like the valleys in the mountains. So like snowboarding and skiing was stuff that I grew up with. And so I don't think it was the snow or like the cold. It was more just the amount of snow and cold and how long it lasted. So like people would say, "Oh, well, you only get like summer for 3 months." And I was like, "Oh, you're funny." And then I only got summer for like 2.5 months. And I was like, "Oh, you're not lying." I think aside from weather, I think the biggest adjustment for me was knowingly wanting to get away, experience something different. I came from a very tight-knit family, and I needed somewhere where that I could feel that support within the group that I had. And that's exactly what I got at NDSU. And obviously there's a learning curve, regardless of who you are, if you're coming from high school to college. I mean, that's just a different lifestyle. I mean, you are responsible for your own schedule. You're responsible for your own grades. I mean, there's not a whole lot of hand-holding when it comes to college. And that's the thing that I loved. I think just like the constant competition, not only for myself, but like as a team. And I loved that, that you win and you lost with who you had that day. And you know what, if you wanted to work hard, that was your choice. And we always said, like what you do in practice hours is necessary. That's what every single person in the country is doing. It's what you do outside of those hours that are required of you that really truly define you as a player and as a person. So obviously there was a huge adjustment, had a lot of homesick moments, but I learned, that who I was around, I loved. And I loved that I could go in my coach's office and just sit there for an hour and talk about anything but softball. I love that I could talk to a senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, and those conversations didn't differ, maybe in advice, but not with respect or anything like that. And I found a family in North Dakota, and I love that. So, yeah.
Awesome. So speaking of NDSU, and kind of like the recruiting process, when did you start as a high school athlete looking at colleges, doing the things that you did to get to where you are now?
Gosh, so long ago. I would probably say I started my 8th grade or freshman year. And, back then it was so different than it is now. And, back then it was just, hey, here's my schedule. I would love to come to your school. And it was the mass emails and that when we get a lot of that still, but for me back then to be seen, given where I lived, it was traveling to different places, and it was being on these teams that practice 4 hours away from my house, and not being in the state half the year because I was traveling so much for softball to be seen. I think that's like a huge difference is back then it was just a ton of putting myself out there on an individual level, but in different places. So whether that's tournaments, camps, individual games, and it took a while, and like by my junior year, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then that summer kind of exploded for me, which was awesome. And now that I know recruiting rules a lot better, it makes a lot more sense. But at the time I was like, oh gosh, but yeah, I would definitely say it started during my freshman year. Now, and I will say that honestly, I didn't really understand it, and I didn't really have, like the education that I obviously have now, what in terms of recruiting means, for a lot of athletes. And I didn't have that in my small little Northern California town. So, but yeah, it was definitely different. It was definitely a lot of traveling to tournaments and camps and emails that I don't know if they necessarily did anything or not, but yeah.
Okay. So now as a college coach presently, what do you look for in high school players when you're recruiting them? And, how much does advanced metrics play into your decision-making process now?
Yeah. I would say, so I can't typically talk about the recruiting process, but I will just say, from an individual, like when I instruct a lot of players, so I do a lot of personal lessons, or even like when kids come to camp, I think there's a lot of different things I look for. One, I think I look for who's going to be a good teammate, and I think that is one of the characteristics that actually goes, kind of ignored a lot, is I am looking at your physical abilities, but I am also, and I know a lot of people say this, but it's so true. Like, do you hustle on and off the field? Like, are you the first one to go pick up a empty bucket without somebody telling you? Like, do you pick up a teammate's glove that just struck out and bring it out to her? Just like the little things that like may not matter in the grand scheme of thing, but like truly tell me who you are as a person, as a player. And I think one thing is like having a great attitude and great energy. I think, I do think that there is a time and place to be like, dang it, like I really wish I got a hit, and then being able to flip that switch as soon as you go to defense. And for me, when I was a player, it was every time I put on my shin guards, I was done. I was done with the last at bat. I was done with the last inning, whatever that is. And then my flip was switched. And a lot of those things I look for, and, like someone that like you can feed off of almost. And as far as metrics go, I think they're extremely important, and although I don't think they define everything about you as an athlete, I think they're extremely important to note where you are now, and then the milestones that you reach to where you want to go. And so like a lot of athletes, I've been starting to work with a lot of the younger generation athletes, I guess you can say. And one thing, they come in and they're like, I want to throw a 1.7. And I'm like, that's great, but like, where are you now? And I'm like, let's work on where you are now, and then let's progress a 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, and I remember telling one of my players, we had camp, and I told him, I was like, you may want to throw down faster. Everyone wants to increase their pop or decrease their pop times, but you don't realize that every single part of your throw is what does that. You moving faster before the ball, moving your feet, and just getting rid of it. It may get the ball down there faster, but maybe not as accurate. And accuracy is just as important, and And so I always derail. I'm so sorry.
No, this is all good stuff about catching. I'll tell you, I love the pop times and the talk about it, because it needs to be mastered, and it is what you say. It's every single little thing that matters. It really does.
Totally. And I was, in a lot of things. So I'm kind of a throwing nut. Like since I had rotator and labrum surgery, one thing that I was talking about Lance when they first called me about being the catching director. I said, this is a passion of mine, because where I grew up, I didn't get a lot of that. I didn't get a lot of the good instruction. So I came into college with an injured arm. And then with use and everything else, I was almost thankful for my surgery, because it allowed me to rebuild my entire throw. So now when I teach and I coach on throwing, I do it in a very strict and formatted manner, so that I can coach girls and women to not make the mistakes I did, and everyone's different. I think throwing is not a cookie cutter thing. I think a lot of things need to be coached correctly and almost similarly, but the way, Brian, you throw is not the way I'm going to throw, and it's not the way catcher A is going to throw. And so I do think that as far as catching goes, there's probably not as many metrics as hitting, let's say, but I do think that they are extremely important. I don't think that they're the whole solution, but I definitely think that they're part of it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
All right, so we just came through, and hopefully it's leaving us, but the COVID kind of era here, right?
Yeah.
So how much has that affected the recruiting of college players in your mind, and how long will that impact last?
Oh man, I think it's changed a lot, and I remember when it first started happening, sports never stops. I mean, I know we did take a little pause there, but it's an ever going cycle. And I remember during the summer of COVID, we couldn't go see anyone. But everything we were doing was virtual. So we would take someone on a virtual tour. We would take someone on a virtual campus visit. And although it was very weird, because I'm a very big relationship builder. I like relationship building. I like energy. I like communication. And, although it's awesome to see a familiar face over the screen, it just, to me, isn't the same as being on the dirt with someone or walking through campus with someone. And so it was really strange, because, you can see pictures, but I don't know, I don't think I could have seen a picture of NDSU and fell in love with it as I did when I walked through campus. And so it was definitely strange, and not being able to go into any games was hard, and now in saying that, I think that's where the metrics played a huge key. And I say that because, when we started opening up slightly, but opening up, when we would get recruits, or when we could start recruiting again, what we would do is wait for a video. Send us a video, send us your metrics, send us your pop times, or whatever that is. And instead of just writing on a piece of paper, there are plenty of platforms out there that you can use to digitize those numbers. And I think that is what is, to me, so crazy, because when I was in high school, that was not a thing. And when I was going through my recruiting process, it was an email, and you sent your tournament schedule. And although that is important, and I do still see that, when we're talking about well, who do we want on campus for this event? The first thing we do is look up their profile and see if that they have a video on them, and just check them out. And so I think it is a lot different now with COVID, but I do think it has shown us how important technology is now. And I think you could say that about any industry. And I am a big fan of technology. For my catchers, I do a lot of videos, a ton of videos. I think seeing what you're doing and seeing what you should be doing are ways that make it easier to conceptualize, even though you might not feel it yet. Now I just think that bridges the gap a lot easier to what you're doing now, and then saying, oh, I don't know, I can't feel it, and saying like, okay, now I can feel what I'm doing wrong. Now I just need to try to fix that. So
yeah, I do the same exact thing with pitching lessons. I take video the first lesson, and then I take it, like 2 lessons after, and then I do side-by-side comparison to see what they're improving on from a mechanical standpoint, right? So I think that's golden for these young athletes to be able to see themselves through a video and see the changes they've made and the good work they've done. So I love that too.
And one thing that I think is really cool is I remember I had an athlete my second year as a coach, and she was really struggling, and and there's just always dips and valleys and long periods of stretches when you're really trying to fix a mechanic that they just might get a little frustrated. And there was about three months, and I spend a good deal of my training on throwing because I do think it's an under practiced movement. And I just remember the moment that she finally felt what she was doing and just gave me the biggest smile. And I was like, that is why I coach. And it just made me so happy, because I'm like, you know what? You can go and look at this video 3 months ago, and although they may look slightly different, I think it's that difference that is what's awesome. Like it may take you a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year, but the progress is what should be celebrated, and I think that's what's awesome. And I think by doing videos, you can capture that progress. So
yeah, I get the same reaction when they throw that first curveball that's just nasty and breaks like
just
exactly the way they want it, right? And they look at me and they're like, I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, you did.
Yeah, because you won't believe how hard it is for, somebody that's going into high school to learn breaking balls and stuff. It's a tough thing to do. I'm sure it's the same on the softball, different types of pitches in softball that they have to learn. So I know I'm in the bullpen a lot,
but I definitely cannot teach how to throw a curveball. I like to tell myself I can, but I'm like, I have no idea.
So you are the Area Scouts Director of Catching. And what do you hope to accomplish with youth athletes on our platform, and kind of what attracted you? I think we already talked about the base and the biomechanics portion, but what else kind of attracted you to the platform?
I think first and foremost, I remember when I was I was talking with Lance about the very first conversation we had on Zoom. And one thing he mentioned was exactly what I went through. He said I was a coach of my my kids' team because no one else wanted to or could, or schedules. And to me, I was like, I want to be that coach that has something that you may not get in your hometown, because I wasn't able to do that, and I wasn't able to go online and find instruction that wasn't, outdated or not for me specifically. And I think that's something that really drew me in, because, I think back to my high school and even in my freshman year of college, I wish that there was more that I could have maybe done or that was offered to me, so that I could be a little bit more prepared. And maybe if I did, I wouldn't have to have surgery, and those are the things I think about a lot, my experience and how that might translate to someone who's going through what I went through, and I live in the Midwest, and I can tell you for sure, I've been contracted out to do a lot of camps in different areas. And one thing that I always hear is, man, I just wish we had better coach. I just wish we had more coaching. Not that people don't try, they just don't know. And it's not that they don't want to know, it's that they just don't have the avenues to learn, and I've been to a lot of different little towns. And actually my best friend, her dad is a community ed director, and it's a little town like 3 hours to the border of North Dakota. And he hired me for a day to come out and do a coaches clinic. And these coaches were just like please, like, let us learn, you know? And I don't think that people don't want to learn. It's just that they might not know or have access to. I know I didn't. And so I think that's what's really matters, you know, that there are people out there that want to learn the sport, not for themselves, but for their players, right? And I think that's why you coach. You coach to develop the players individually, not a cookie cutter player A that has to look the same. It's an individual characteristics that make them special and talented and unique and successful. And I think that's what drew me to the platform, because I wanted to be a part of that. I think the development of athletes is the most emotionally gratifying, is seeing, like we were just talking about, seeing them on day one and how that differs from day 30, and then how that differs from a freshman to a senior. And I think that's what's cool. And for those who want to learn, regardless if it's a parent or a student athlete or a coach, the fact that they want to learn and that they're searching for avenues to learn, I think is what's cool. Because I think when you want to learn, you're doing what's best for the people around you, not for yourself, you know? And I think that's what's cool. And sports are ever changing. You know, I think the foundation of a lot of things that we do as a catcher will probably stay the same, but that doesn't mean that it can't change, you know, and given the individual. And so I think that's what drew me to Area Scouts, because I felt like, you know, if I knew or had a platform like Area Scouts 10 years ago when I was in high school, you know, it could have been different for me. And I think that's what's special, is that there is avenues for an athlete who was like me to know better and do better. And same with coaches. And I think that's awesome.
You know, I want to add to that a little bit, because I didn't actually even know what Brian was going to ask you for questions. I didn't know how you were going to answer them. So, but it's funny that you went down this path with that question, because I just spoke to a high school coach for softball in South Florida yesterday, and we were talking about that same thing, just that there's a ton of people volunteering, and it's such a difficult thing, because here you have a group of people that want to help these athletes, but they just don't know how to. And I think there's a whole nother group of coaches out there that want to help and want to believe they know what they're doing sometimes, but are almost embarrassed to ask a question that they don't know. So they just wing it. And I feel like having those coaches on this platform, they're almost going to be able to fly under the radar and get all of the right information that they should be passing on to their athletes without anybody ever knowing that they didn't know that coming in. So it's almost like they get to get all that right information that they get to pass on, and they don't have to be embarrassed to the fact that they don't know common answers that they probably should be knowing before teaching youth athletes. So
and you know what? I think it's also cool, because I can tell you in the last, well, now going on my 5th year of coaching, like, I learned from my students just as much as they learn from me, you know? And I think that goes with the whole, like, you can't coach everyone the same. You know, a lot of the movements, the foundational movements are similar, but, you know, the way I coach a 5'2" catcher is very different than the way I coach a 5'9", 5'11", 6'1", and although the structure, the foundation of those movements are similar, you know, I think it's, one, understanding who your athletes are and their capabilities, their flexibilities, their strength, and 2, being able to adjust from there. And maybe it's a learning curve for you just as much as it is for them. And another thing, I do think that, you know, kind of going off what you said, Lance, I think the more that I've been, you know, contracted out to work with a lot of different associations or colleges for camps, the more I just hear, you know, like, I want to learn. Parents, I want to learn. Association coaches, I want to learn. And every time I go into a situation like that, I'm like, this is just as much about the student athlete asking me questions as it is a parent. You know, as a parent, I want you to come up and ask why I'm doing the things I'm doing with your child. You know, like, why do I hold her hand this way? Or why is she moving her feet this way? Or that way, when I'm not around, you know what to look for and why you're looking for that. I think the why is as big as factor as what, and I think the fact that a lot of coaches want to figure out the why, and like you said, they may be embarrassed or don't know how to ask. I think it's almost just as important, if not more.
I know we want to leave some time for questions, Lance, but you know what? Let me ask just one more here. What is your favorite memory in softball?
Oh gosh, my favorite memory in softball. That's a really tough question. I will say, as I'm going to give you two answers. As a player, well, that's hard, but I will say as a player, I think one of the coolest memories that I've been a part of is we went to Alabama for a tournament and we ended up beating them, and they were ranked first or second, and we beat them 2-1. And it was a really, really, really cool moment, because it was just one of those games where the crowd was deafening and it was just like a battle every pitch, every out, every inning, and it was truly a team win. And so that was one of the coolest playing moments I've been a part of. As a coach, I mean, there's too many. I will say though that the moments where I call them light bulb moments, I think those will always be my favorite, regardless of what athlete I'm working with. The moments where they're just like so irritated because they're not getting a movement, or they're just not understanding, and then it finally clicks, and it might not click consistently yet, but the fact that they like can feel it, that's honestly, there's nothing that brings me more joy than that, just seeing them just light up because they know that they've been working so hard, and I probably repeated myself 1 million times. And then they finally get it is just so gratifying to me. And making it to the World Series for the first time was pretty cool. So
don't forget about that.
Yeah, I'll just slide that one right in quick.
All right, Lance. Well, thank you very much, Alyssa. I think Lance might have a couple questions here.
Yeah. I'm gonna do. I got eight of these. I picked out 5. I'm gonna try to push through here. My for anyone that joined us late, my throat is in rough shape from if the Yankees had put up a better fight last night, I probably would have had a little more of a voice. But so I'm gonna do 5 of these. We got Andy from Minnesota. My 13-year-old daughter is an aspiring catcher. We've been looking for a catching coach for several years with no luck. Do you do private instruction? We are in White Bear, Minnesota. And we're wondering if you were closer, if you knew someone you would recommend to work with here.
I do private lessons. Come again?
Is that near you where they are?
White Bear Lake. It's a northern city. I'm in what was his name?
Andy.
Andy. I'm in Eden Prairie. I do lessons out of Ham Lake. It's a facility called The Lab. I also do lessons at Mission Fast Pitch, which is here in Eden Prairie. And depending on what association you work with, I am starting to do a lot of association training through different, catching instructions. And so the answer is yes. One thing too is that we usually offer a lot of like catching camps at the University of Minnesota if you're ever interested in those. But I think that it's awesome that your daughter's a catcher. So congratulations, the best position there is. Sorry, pitcher. Sorry, Brian.
No offense taken.
But I'll shoot, maybe Lance should just shoot my email in the chat in case he wants to. Okay. Yeah. I'll just shoot my email in the chat, but yeah.
Becky from Iowa, our 10-year-old daughter has found a new passion for catching. Do you follow a particular coach or training that you feel started to help you get better? Are there any mentors that teach catching online that you follow and respect?
Well, I super duper respect the Area Scouts platform. So once the softball gets up on there, it's a great one to follow. But I also, honestly, I follow a lot of like baseball hacks. So baseball, softball training hacks, and not all that I love, but I do take a lot of my drills from different accounts, and I'm also part of a foundation called Wind Up Fast Pitch. And it's me and two other instructors, and we tend to post some of our drills online if you need something for just from online learning. And then usually fundamentally, I guess I do follow a strict pattern, but it depends on the athlete. I usually try to work, from the ground up. So I work fundamentals on blocking, making sure that their glove is first, and then their knees can replace their feet. So I just draw a line in the dirt or put a piece of tape on the ground. And I think 1, 2, making sure in blocking that they're not scared of the ball. So like, unlike my dad who shot baseballs out of a machine at me, I tend to throw tennis balls. And if my dad's on here, it's true. And so, but tennis balls, because I don't want them to be afraid of the ball. And the number one thing that I see in a lot of my young athletes is they like to go catch the ball. So I usually tend to like tell them to put their throwing hand like in their chest protector back here so they can't actually use it. And receiving, one thing that I fundamentally always, and a lot of coaches teach it differently, which is totally fine, but I tend to usually keep like the thumb underneath the ball. So I usually say like the L of the pocket, just because like this is really hard on your wrist. If you can see my angle of my elbow. And then throwing, I always start with my feet. So you can have the fastest transfer, but if your feet aren't efficient, you're not going to throw the ball well. Making sure that it's just like you always catch the ball first and then it's right left into your throw. I would say those are the most basic fundamentals that I try to follow. And then I always individualize it from there.
Greg from Cincinnati. My daughter is turning 16, is one of the better softball players in our area, but we have never been contacted by coaches. I want to start being proactive for her. Are there a few suggestions that you can give me to start helping us make some contacts with coaches that may be interested in her?
Without trying to go too far into recruiting, because I typically can't, but I would say though that, if she's passionate about playing at the next level in college, I would just start making a recruiting video. And not only that, but I would also, if you do have any metric systems, whether it's Area Scouts or Blast or, whatever that is, that you send those as well, because it truly is something that we look at. I can watch a video and tell you a lot of gaps. I could watch a 1-minute video and tell you, what she does really well, what she might need to work on, is this something that would fit in my program or whatnot. And so I think that would be a great start. And you know what, I think too, like have her pick her top 3, 4, 5 universities and then pick up to 25, 30. I mean, I never knew I wanted to go to NDSU until I got on campus. So I don't think, like, I did have a dream school. I had a couple of them, but I would not change my experience for anything. So I would just say, I guess, be open-minded, but I would definitely start with the videos and the metrics for sure.
Grace from New Mexico, in regards to your injury, do you teach any of your arm care concepts that you practice on the Area Scouts platform?
Grace, I love that question. I guess I don't teach the rehab aspects, but I definitely teach like the fundamental building up, like the progression, I should say, aspects. What I like to lean on is, when the reason I got my injury is because I was a very top heavy thrower. So I threw with basically just like my chest and my arm. So I didn't have a lot of power behind it. All my power came from my upper body, which is why I got injured. And so the main thing that I preach in, my Area Scouts training is our footwork, because that's what gets our timing into our throw and honestly a lot of our power. And so I think that's one thing, is the way I rebuilt my throw and the way that I try to train a lot of my athletes coming into college is what I put on Area Scouts, because I think it's fundamentally super important to learn that, you know, like, you have to stay stacked and balanced and strong and throw from your back, your legs. And
some of our sponsors that we work with, so we have Scout Hub, actually owned by Todd Blyleven, and you know, helps athletes with the recruiting process and getting assessments. But Diamond Kinetics, one of our sponsors that, or partners that helps us out with, you know, our equipment for getting these metrics that we do. We also use different types of metrics gathering equipment, but really depends on what the evaluator has access to. And then we have partnerships with, you know, New England A baseball and a bunch of different, you know, equipment providers, as well as Sports Thread that I'll talk about a little bit later. So when we get onto the platform itself, you know, you're going to see here you get a bunch of personal information. And then when you get down to the bottom, you're going to be able to do base athlete or premium athlete. You also can take some assessments such as nutrition, as well as coming to the platform soon will be a neuro assessment as well. And we also have a nutrition assessment. Then as you go into this, you can fill in your stats from previous years. Great tool to have, you know, kind of a scorecard, if you will, or a baseball card of all your previous stats. And then you can fill in your metrics that are given from Area Scouts. We'll put them in here. This is an example of the hitting metrics. And then we have also those metrics in the base stuff. It's all going to be put into these benchmarks. And here you'll see the base assessment benchmarks, where we're going to have a test and we're going to have a score, and the athlete will get their corrective videos here. One for mobility, one for motor control, and they'll be able to develop from that standpoint. From the on-field assessment, we're going to have the same thing. We're going to have corrective videos for each aspect of the game. They have benchmarks for. We have leg lift. We have a bunch of different things for pitching, hitting, catching, fielding. The objectives are here. The flags are here. And then you have the correctives that the athlete can do as well to get better, develop from the benchmarks that we found. Lastly, Sports Thread is a national social media platform. You can put all the information in there, academics, stats, videos. You know, it's a really great place to have that stuff that's in colleges. So every one of our athletes gets a profile on Sports Thread as well, and can share that information with colleges. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony, who's going to discuss base.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So my name's Anthony Anzillo. I'm our National Director of Sports Medicine and Performance. I'm a physical therapist as well as a strength and conditioning specialist. I really enjoyed that interview that you did with Alyssa, Brian. She's certainly full of energy and passionate clearly about all this stuff. And some of the things she talked about really teed me up perfectly to now talk about discuss the importance of the base assessment and how it really fits into all this. So, you know, we'll use, this is for any position of any sport really, but we'll just, the proper movement patterns and mobility and all of the joints of the body and flexibility and adequate strength and stability, all of it is super important to serve as a foundation for the athlete to build up from. And the better that their foundation of all these things are, the more successful they'll be on the field. And, you know, it helps to make them more durable and more resistant to injury as well. So these are the building blocks. That's why part of the reason it's called base, trying to set that foundation. So if we use catching as an example, you know, for a catcher to really be efficient, first off, to get down into their stance, they need to have a great squat pattern, which requires a lot of mobility in the ankles and the knees and the hips, as well as strength in the legs to be able to support their body in that position, strength and power in the legs to be able to pop up to make plays and throw the ball, as well as adequate strength and stability and mobility in their shoulders, specifically their throwing arms. You know, aside from the pitcher, they're throwing the ball pretty much more than anyone else on the field. So where the base assessment fits into play is we first do this on all athletes to look at their overall physical foundation and put them through a very comprehensive exam to try to pick up any deficits in any areas that they have in their body. It's extremely comprehensive, trying to make sure that no joint and no muscle goes untested through the entire base assessment. So we have the assessment broken into 4 sections: biomechanics, athleticism, sequence, and endurance. And in biomechanics, this is where we're looking at really fundamental movement patterns that puts the mobility of all the joints of the athlete's body, as well as their level of motor control to control all these movements, really puts those to the test. So, one of the things that one of the movements within the biomechanics section is a squat. And if an athlete lacks any ankle mobility, knee mobility, hip mobility, overhead, shoulder mobility, any of those things I've mentioned, then they're going to score poorly on the squat, which will trigger them to receive some corrective exercises to target their specific limitations to help improve that movement pattern. And it's that way for the 6 other movements within the biomechanics section as well. There's an objective list of scoring criteria, which we can score athletes a 3, 2, or a 1 on, and then they receive corrective exercises for the ones that they score below a 3 on to help address those things. So that's really the building block, is the biomechanics section. And then next, after that, we move into the athleticism section, and that's where things get a little bit more physically demanding, where we have several tests looking at both strength and power of the upper body and the lower body, single arm and single leg stuff. So we can also compare right to left asymmetries and asymmetries in the body through all those things: strength, mobility, flexibility, balance. That's another risk factor for injury. So we tried to, this assessment was put together using a lot of research and common findings that are predictive of injury. So we test for those things and then provide corrective exercises on all of them where the athlete scored below what an ideal score would be. Also within that athleticism section, we also have several tests of speed and agility and are able to compare those to expected norms based on their age group and gender and sport. And after that, we move into the sequence section, and Alyssa kind of teed me up for this discussion too. So when we talk about sequence, what we're referring to is the kinematic sequence, and that's basically how efficiently the athlete is able to transfer power from their legs through their core to their arms. And you heard from Alyssa that part of the reason she got injured sounds like she didn't have a great kinematic sequence. She said that she had an issue with footwork and that she wasn't utilizing her legs to initiate the throw to develop power, and that she was just pretty much overusing her upper body and her shoulder, and then that resulted in too much stress being placed on that area of her body, which subsequently broke down and created an injury that she had to deal with and rehabilitate. So by testing these things on the front end proactively, our hope and our goal is to be able to prevent some of those things and prevent situations that she had to go through, and that all athletes that we have the opportunity to work with, prevent them from having to do those things. Our goal is really to maximize how long and how successfully an athlete's able to play the sport that they love for, and not to be limited by injuries or poor performance. So this kinematic sequence concept, it's most evident in rotational athletes, that power is derived and transferred in that specific sequence, beginning in the legs and then being transferred through the core and then delivered by their arm, which is either throwing the ball or swinging a bat or swinging a club or any of those things. And we're able to administer a few tests to get an idea of their kinematic sequence, and of course provide corrective exercises when needed. And finally, we move into the endurance section, and here we're looking at both cardiorespiratory endurance, just aerobic endurance, as well as muscular endurance of the core muscles. So poor endurance or fatigue is a risk factor both for injury as well as for poor performance. So the more resilient an athlete is to, or the better endurance that an athlete has, the more resilient they'll be to injury, as well as the better they'll perform when fatigue would otherwise set in. So really we try to cover, I think you can derive from those things that we really try to make sure that all bases are covered with it and that we really leave no stone unturned with this assessment.
I did get, I got kicked off halfway through our interview here, but I got two of the questions. They basically get saved up during our call. So I have two of them left here. One of them is related to the question on coaches, and then the other one, Anthony, I'm going to have this one go to you from the same woman, Grace from New Mexico, asking about arm care, that she is searching for her daughter in softball as well as her son in baseball, and how does base help in the aspect of arm care and any programs that you offer on the Area Scouts platform through base for arm care preventative measures. So I guess I'll let you answer that, like how this correlates with arm care, if there is an arm care program on the platform. Brian, I'm going to let you answer that because I know Josh went into this on the baseball side. So I'm going to let actually Anthony answer the first part, and then Brian answer the second part, and I'll answer the question from Craig on the coaches.
Perfect. So with the base assessment, what we're trying to do specific, if we're looking at it specific to throwing, is ensuring that the athlete has proper mobility in their shoulders and strength in their shoulders, and proper mobility through their and stability through their thoracic spine and hips and legs, and pretty much all of the pieces that have to work together, the pieces of the body that have to work together, to throw well. And if there are any weak links in that chain, in either with stiffness or weakness, then they'll be provided with corrective exercises to target those weak links in the chain. So that's kind of how the base assessment part works. And like, as I mentioned, we do tests for upper body strength. So we're able to, if some weakness in there, specifically their throwing arm, is noted, then they'll receive some corrective exercises to help improve the strength and stability in their shoulder. I think we lost. Did we lose Brian to talk about the arm care?
We're not having much luck with the feeds.
No.
And Grace, I want to touch on, just because you've asked several questions about this. Number one, we have several great people as Area Scouts representatives, evaluators in New Mexico. So please reach out to us. You can either reach out at contact@areascouts.com or sign up your son and daughter for free profiles right through the main page, www.areascouts.com. We can connect you with who we have in New Mexico, who I'm sure can help both of your kids. One other thing I just want to mention, if there are issues there that they're having with, and the reason why you're asking for arm care is if there are injuries there, obviously make sure you are reaching out to your primary physician and checking into that, because we are not, our evaluators are not doctors. So we help with the movement assessment side, and our goal is to give every athlete the best chance to stay healthy on the field. But if there are existing issues there, just make sure you get those checked out with a professional there. And then, moving forward, or if there's not an injury there, we'd love to have you on the platform and working with one of our evaluators to, again, give them the best chance to avoid anything like that in the future if they are having any issues there. And Craig, and we did lose Brian, so we will continue without him. He'll be on next Wednesday. And Craig from Cincinnati with the coach's question, as far as being able to reach out to softball players. This was directed originally to Alyssa, but now asking how Area Scouts helps with this. And that is actually something that, so we are not recruiters, we're not scouts, even though the name says that, but we do work with several outside organizations that do that, do assist kids with that. And we're actually working on something now that's going to kind of set scores or standards for particular age groups. So when they are going through the base assessment and the on-field assessments, they'll actually receive a score that can be compared to their peers and others that have gone through these evaluations on our platform, and it'll give you kind of a good idea of, you know, what comparison you have to other kids that have been recruited and brought on to maybe junior colleges or Division 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be. So we are getting into that and can help with that side of things. So again, fill out do a free profile, and that way we can kind of connect you with a whole network of people that, you know, pretty much in the end, we're going to be able to help athletes with every aspect of youth sports and moving forward through the whole time, from the time they're 8 years old all the way up through the high school level. So anything there is that they need, I'm sure we can help you with. Anthony, unfortunately, I lost some of the other questions. We had 3 or 4 others there that when I got cut off. So anyone has any questions, you can always send them to us, and we can answer them on the next call. So you can always reach out at contact at Area Scouts. You can go to the contact page on areascouts.com. And that is also, again, where you sign up for the profiles. Anthony, if there's anything else you want to add, we're at that 9:03 mark.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. I loved that. Was a great call with Alyssa. Another great live interview tonight, and look forward to next week and seeing everybody then. Thank you, Anthony.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching.